Ghost of the Ridge just proposed to that black girl. The cruel sneer leapt out of the saloon, rolling with the red dust into every corner of town. Men laughed. Women sighed in false pity when word spread that Naomi, the black seamstress mocked her whole life, had dared to nod at the proposal of the reclusive widower. Amid the polished warnings of the town's fine ladies, Naomi stood straight and answered with calm. My choice is mine. I know what I'm choosing. That night, in the cabin lit by firelight, his rough hand closed around her smaller one. Malcolm bent close and whispered, It has been a long time since I felt a woman's touch. Naomi trembled, but did not pull away. The flames brushed her cheek with color as her eyes closed, the space between them no more than a breath. Outside, Dust Creek still scoffed. Inside those timber walls, a quiet bond was woven, fragile yet strong enough to defy an entire town. Morning in Dust Creek, 1877, began like any other. The sun rose over the mountains, its pale gold light spilling across the main dirt road, stretching long shadows of wagons and townsfolk over the red dust. Dry winds carried the smell of old whiskey, sweat, and the distant echo of hooves. Yet one sudden piece of news, dropped first inside the Silver Spur saloon, jolted the town awake as if raiders had come tearing through. Inside the dim saloon, where morning light was smothered by heavy curtains, the usual men gathered at the bar, nursing whiskey in place of breakfast. They were ranch hands, smiths, teamsters, each with their own reason to begin the day with liquor. Amid the racket of laughter, a hard slap on the table cut through. A near-empty glass rattled, and heads turned. It was Hank Doyle, proud to claim he always knew everything first in town. His face was flushed with drink, his eyes glimmering with glee, ready to unleash something bound to stir the dust. You boys heard yet? Ghost of the Ridge, Malcolm Hayes, the mountain widower. He just proposed to Spinster Carter. Silence held for half a beat before the room burst into raucous laughter. A few men nearly choked on their drinks, pounding their glasses on the table in delight. Naomi Carter? That black seamstress? Hell, she's uglier than my lame horse, one shouted. Another chimed in. That scarred ghost of a man, dragging her home? Must be desperate as sin. The jeers slipped past the cracked wooden walls and into the street. Gossip left the saloon faster than smoke, winding into every corner of town. At Murphy's General Store, women in bonnets clustered around sacks of flour. Elizabeth Murphy, weighing sugar on the scales, sighed long and heavy, her voice dripping pity. Poor Naomi, 32 years old now. Must be sheer desperation to say yes to some wild man off the mountain. At once, the others leaned in, eyes bright with appetite for talk. What if he forced her? You know the kind of savagery mountain men like Malcolm are capable of. Another woman lowered her tone just enough for all to hear. More likely, he just wanted a servant. Someone to sew, cook, and scrub. Love? Who could love that girl? Nods followed, false sighs and stifled giggles. Like dye seeping into cloth, the story spread, staining every street. By noon, ridicule had turned into sport. Out front of the schoolhouse, children gathered under the lead of the blacksmith's boy, chanting a twisted rhyme. Naomi and Ghost sitting in a tree, ugly, ugly, plain to see. Their shrill song rose with laughter, catching the ears of passers-by. Some grown folk even smiled, indulgent, not bothering to stop them. By afternoon, no corner of Dust Creek was untouched. In the barber's shop, the barber himself announced for all to hear, I'd sooner look at the wanted poster out front than Naomi Carter's face. The room erupted with laughter, men tossing in wild shonokwasun embellishments, Malcolm drunk, Naomi working witchcraft. With each telling, the tale grew further from truth. By sundown, with the mountains casting long golden shadows across the town, there was no one left who hadn't heard. Some mocked outright, some feigned pity, others spiced the tale with lies. But on one point they all agreed. This was the finest joke of the year, the sort of farce a small town could feast on for days. What none of them realized was that this tale they laughed over would become the fire that changed everything. Not just for Malcolm Hayes and Naomi Carter, but for Dust Creek itself. In the northern mountains above Dust Creek, where tall pines held steady against cold winds, Malcolm Hayes had chosen a life apart. Once he had a family, a wife and a small child, but a plague swept the town years ago, taking them both in a bitter winter. From then on, he kept no ties with crowds or company. Folks said he built his cabin with his own scarred hands, set logs one by one, stacked stone upon stone, and lived quiet among wild creatures and shadows. Day by day, Malcolm hunted to eat, cut wood to warm himself, and read books to fill the hollow inside. Old volumes brought back from Denver, on philosophy, on farming, on history, were his only tether to the larger world. The silence of the forest seemed to accept him, neither questioning nor pitying, letting him drift as a shade among trees. In town, they named him Ghost of the Ridge, a man not dead, yet not truly living. Naomi Carter carried a solitude of her own. Daughter of a black family that had struggled to stake a life in Dust Creek, she had tasted scorn early. In her youth, she had loved Samuel Hargrove, son of a wealthy merchant. But when her father's ventures failed and the family fortune fell, Samuel turned his back and wed a white banker's daughter. The cruel words of that time, "She is nothing, she'll never be anyone," burned deep into Naomi's memory. Her parents died in another wave of sickness, leaving her the small dress shop and her mother's old medical books. By day, Naomi earned her bread stitching, mending shirts for miners, sewing dresses for ranch wives. By night, when Dust Creek sank into snores and whiskey dreams, she lit her lamp, read the worn pages of healing, and filled her notebook with notes. In a world that dismissed her with sneers, learning was her way to keep from being swallowed whole. They were two abandoned souls, one man withdrawn to the mountain, one woman stranded in the town, each branded by society with its cruel labels. One afternoon, when Malcolm came down to trade furs for salt and flour, his steps passed the doorway of the dress shop. Naomi was lifting a heavy bundle of cloth, fumbling as it spilled across the porch. Rolls of fabric tumbled into the red dust. He bent at the same moment she did. His broad, sun-darkened hand brushed against her smaller, work-roughened one. Naomi startled, drawing a sharp breath. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, the air stilling between them. She pulled back quickly, cheeks flushed, while he only nodded once, gathering the last roll to hand her. Another time, Malcolm brought in an old coat. Naomi, hesitant, measured his shoulders to adjust the seams. As she looped the tape across his wide frame, her fingers grazed his chest, trembling as though afraid of misstep. Malcolm sat steady, unmoving, but felt the tremor in her uneven breath. He said nothing, only watched the bowed face, lashes lowered to hide the eyes that refused to meet his. Once, as Naomi bent over her work, the needle bit her skin, leaving a bead of blood. Malcolm, standing nearby, saw it. Without pause, he stepped forward, took her hand gently in his. His calloused palm steadied her slender fingers, and he drew a strip of clean cloth from his pocket, binding the wound with care. Naomi watched his hand covering hers, her heartbeat hammering like a drum. Her lips parted as if to speak, yet no sound came. Malcolm lifted his gaze, his eyes deep as the forest, and for a moment longer than needed, he kept her hand in his. These touches were never contrived, never wrapped in sweet words. Yet the silence made them heavier, more enduring than speech. Their eyes lingered those few seconds too long, until each could hear the breath of the other. Naomi turned away first, flustered, while Malcolm stood rooted like an old pine, though within him something stirred he could not name. Dust Creek knew nothing of these moments. To the town, they were only outcasts, a scarred widower recluse and an ugly black seamstress. But within those clumsy brushes and quiet glances, they were finding in each other what neither had been given before: the grace of being truly seen. That morning, the sky over Dust Creek was drawn with thin gray streaks like ashes, the sun casting only a pale wash of gold across the red dust road. The saloon roared as usual, but Malcolm Hayes did not stop there. He walked straight to Carter's dress shop, where the faded wooden door creaked beneath a swinging sign. Naomi sat at her cutting table, morning light slanting across her hastily tied black hair, her hands moving steady, stitches neat. At the sound of heavy steps on the worn floor, she looked up and started. Malcolm stood in the doorway, so tall his head nearly brushed the beam. He removed his hat, stepped inside, boots creaking under mountain dust. His voice, low and rough, carried no preamble. "Naomi, I came here for something." She froze, fingers holding the scissors mid-air. "Do you need another coat mended?" Malcolm shook his head. He took one step closer, his shadow stretching across half the room. "No. I came to say something plain. I've thought on it for months. I don't care to keep it in anymore. I want to marry you." The scissors slipped from her hand and clinked against the wood. Naomi stared at him, as if her ears had betrayed her. Her body stiffened, only her wide eyes alive, trembling behind round spectacles. What did you say?" Malcolm stood tall, his broad shoulders giving a faint shudder, like a man relieved of a weight. "I want to marry you. I've watched you give yourself away for others, sewing for them, tending to them, asking nothing back. I want a woman like that beside me." Naomi stepped back until the edge of the table pressed her spine, as if she needed something to hold her up. In her mind rose every mocking laugh in Dust Creek, every time they called her Spinster Carter, every whisper that she was the ugly girl no man would want. The words crushed her throat. "Why me?" she blurted, almost in protest. "There are plenty of women in this town. Why me?" Malcolm's gaze held hers, his dark brown eyes as steady as the earth. He spoke slowly. "Because I see what they refuse to see. I saw you patch a poor child's shirt without taking a penny. I saw you leave a basket of bread at a sick miner's door. I saw you bent over those medical books by lamplight, then running out at midnight to deliver a child for a mother who couldn't pay a doctor. I saw it all, Naomi. You never ask, you never boast. You live for others, and because of that, I want to spend what's left of my life living for you." His words fell heavy and warm, like a log dropped into a crackling fire. Naomi felt her chest tighten, breath uneven. No one had ever spoken such things of her. Folks only noticed the unruly hair, the dark skin, the downcast eyes. No one remembered the nights her fingers trembled as she held a thermometer, or the morning she stitched clothes without charge. She bowed her head, lips pressed hard. "You don't know anything about me." Malcolm stepped nearer, until only an arm's reach remained. His voice dropped, steady as stone. "I know enough. I know you're not like them, the ones who judge by what they see. They call me a monster, a ghost, because I chose a different life. I know the weight of being cast out, and I see that same weight in your eyes. Two outcasts. Maybe we understand each other better than anyone else ever could." Naomi's heart pounded. She turned away, fussing with a roll of fabric to escape his gaze. Her hands shook, thread slipping from the needle. "You make it sound easy," she whispered. "But you don't know. I've lived too long being mocked. I don't know if I've got enough faith left to try again." Malcolm stood quiet a long while. Then he bent, picked up the fallen needle, and placed it back in her hand. His fingers touched hers, not pulling away, holding just a breath longer. "I'm not asking you to answer now. I only want you to know I mean it. I have no gold, no name. All I have is respect and a promise to see you as you are. It's the only thing I can give, but it's something no one else ever has." Naomi lifted her eyes, caught in his. Deep, unwavering, bare of deceit. Warmth spread through her chest, threading into her veins. She longed to refuse outright, to shield herself from future hurt, but the words would not come. Somewhere deep, a seed had been planted. Malcolm set his hat back on his head, turned, his frame filling the doorway. Before stepping out, he spoke once more, plain and short. "Think on it." "I didn't come here to jest." The door closed, leaving Naomi standing still, her heartbeat unsteady. The shop fell silent again, save for the whisper of shears and the tick of needle on cloth. Yet within her, his words kept echoing. "I want to marry you." And that night, for the first time in years, Naomi could not read a single page of her medical books. For beneath the dim lamp, every line blurred into the shape of Malcolm Hayes and the rough, honest words that had cracked the walls around her heart. The news of Malcolm Hayes's proposal spread faster than fire on dry grass. In a single night, all of Dust Creek knew. If yesterday it was only a joke tossed around the saloon, today it haunted dinner tables and church porches alike. Folks could not stomach the thought that two people they had long scorned dared to choose each other, as if the order they clung to was being challenged outright. That morning, Naomi bent over her work in the dress shop, needle poised above a customer's hem, when the door swung wide. 3 women swept in, their long black cloaks brushing the floor, faces stern. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, Mrs. Stanley, who ran the bakery, and Prudence Hartwell, sister to the school teacher. They settled in like a tribunal, smoothing their skirts before the trial began. "Naomi Carter," Mrs. Patterson started, her voice soft but iron-bound. "We came out of concern for you. These rumors, they do you no good." Naomi lifted her gaze, still holding the needle. "What rumors, ma'am?" Prudence cleared her throat. "This business with Malcolm Hayes. Do you mean to truly marry him? A man who lives like a beast in the woods, with no church, no law to his name." Mrs. Stanley shook her head with a show of pity. Naomi, you are a colored woman, with no family to stand behind you. We fear you're so desperate you'd seize upon an unworthy choice. To live up there in the cold with a man like him. It would be your grave. Naomi listened, her chest stirring. For years she had bowed beneath such words, but today something in her stood straighter. Malcolm's voice still rang in her memory. I see you, I respect you, and it held her spine firm. She set the needle down, answered slow. Ladies, I thank you for your concern. But my choice is mine. I know well enough what I'm choosing. They exchanged glances, startled at her lack of meekness. Mrs. Patterson's brow furrowed, her tone rising. Naomi, you do not understand. This is not only about you. It touches the honor of the whole community. People will say Dust Creek allowed such a peculiar marriage to stand. Naomi's lips curved, faint but unyielding. If the honor of this community can be shaken by one seamstress's decision, then it must be a fragile thing indeed. Silence fell heavy. They rose in offense, skirts sweeping dust across the wooden floor as they left. Naomi knew the fight was far from over. By noon, under the blazing sun, children gathered outside the shop. They shouted a cruel rhyme, their voices sharp as stones. Naomi and Ghost, wedding day, ugly, ugly, both that way. Rocks clattered against the old roof. Inside, Naomi gripped her hands, heart hammering. For the first time, she longed to throw open the door and silence them. Instead, she bit her lip and refused her tears. Toward evening came the greater test. A familiar figure stood in the doorway, sunlight glinting on slick hair and a polished vest. Samuel Hargrove, her old sweetheart, now husband to the banker's daughter. Naomi, he said, stepping in, hat in hand, eyes half pity, half pride. I heard the news. I could scarcely believe it. You deserve better than this. Naomi sat upright, folding cloth with deliberate care, her eyes lowered. Better? What do you mean? Samuel sighed, voice dipped in false kindness. You had such promise once. If your family hadn't fallen, things might have been different for us, but now, you mustn't demean yourself by taking up with Malcolm Hayes. They say he's more beast than man. I feel sorry for you. The words cut like a blade, but this time Naomi did not waver. She lifted her head, her dark eyes sharp. Sorry for me, or for yourself? If you'd cared, you wouldn't have left me for your wife's dowry. Don't pretend at pity. I have no need of it. Samuel faltered, lips parting without sound. At that moment, the door opened once more. Malcolm Hayes filled the frame, tall, silent, his eyes cold as mountain wind. He did not speak. He simply stood by Naomi's side, steady, his hand resting lightly on the table's edge as if to anchor her. Samuel swallowed hard, stepping back. He looked from Malcolm to Naomi, and in that glance he seemed to see it, the gulf between his hollow pity and the quiet strength beside her. Without another word, he turned and strode out, boots striking sharp on the porch boards. Inside, only two remained. Naomi exhaled, her trembling hands easing at last. Malcolm glanced at her, asking without words. Thank you, Naomi murmured. He gave only a nod, standing still a moment before he left. Yet in that silence, Naomi understood something new. For the first time, she did not feel small before Dust Creek. Perhaps because, at last, she no longer stood alone. That morning, the sky over Dust Creek was a startling blue, yet beneath the bright light, a restless murmur stirred. The small wooden church on the hill, usually filled only on Sundays, was packed to the rafters. Not just the faithful, but townsfolk from every corner, even ranchers from miles away. They had not come to pray. They had come to watch a spectacle. The news had raced across Wyoming. Malcolm Hayes, ghost of the ridge, the widowed hermit of the mountains, was marrying Naomi Carter, the black seamstress long mocked as Spinster Carter. Folks whispered it would be the strangest wedding of the year, perhaps the strangest in the whole territory. Inside, the church buzzed like a fairground. Benches scraped, children giggled, men whispered wagers on whether the bride would cry or the groom stumble drunk. Women in broad hats feigned solemnity, but smiles tugged their lips. Every eye fixed on the door, waiting for the curtain to rise on the show. Behind that door, Naomi's heart pounded like a drum. She wore the dark blue dress she had stitched with her own hands, the wool plain but cut with care, its edges trimmed with quiet grace, the pearl buttons catching light, the only luxury she could afford. At her throat, the old brooch of her mother, a tether to what roots she still had. She clutched a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the fields, holding it like a shield. When the bell tolled, she drew a breath and stepped through the doorway. A hiss of whispers swept the pews. Blue dress, thought brides wore white. Pearl buttons, trying to hide her face. Penniless yet putting on airs. The words pricked, but Naomi kept her gaze straight, feet steady, shoulders tall. Halfway down the aisle, the murmurs broke again. The door swung wide a second time. Malcolm Hayes entered. Not the ragged ghost they knew, with tangled hair, torn leather, and the glare of a wild beast. He wore a black suit cut square to his shoulders, the collar white and crisp. His long hair had been trimmed, his beard shaped to frame the scarred face that now seemed marked with authority rather than ruin. His boots shone, and in his hand he carried his hat. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some women who once scoffed turned red, their eyes lingering longer than they meant. But Malcolm's gaze never strayed. It found Naomi at the end of the aisle and stayed there. He walked slowly, each step striking the boards with weight. The hush that followed him swallowed the mockery whole. By the time he reached the altar, the crowd that had gathered to laugh sat strangely subdued. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, trying to recover his authority. He had little fondness for either bride or groom, and dragged Naomi's name with faint scorn. We gather here today to witness the joining of Malcolm Hayes and Naomi Carter. Yet not a soul dared chuckle. The air itself pressed heavy. The vows began. Malcolm's voice was deep, certain. I, Malcolm Hayes, take you, Naomi Carter, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, to protect you, and to see you for who you are, not by what the world says. I will share with you both hardship and joy through the coldest winters and the harshest summers. The church fell silent. No one had expected such plain words, spoken with such steady truth. Naomi trembled, but her voice rose clearer than she thought possible. I, Naomi Carter, take you, Malcolm Hayes, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you through every storm, to keep the fire of our home with trust and honesty. I promise not to let fear make me small, but to walk with you as your companion. A sharp intake of breath cut the silence. Murmurs shifted, unsettled. Even those who had thrown stones at her roof looked up, startled by her courage. By the authority vested in me, Judge Holloway stammered, I declare you husband and wife. The groom may kiss the bride. The crowd braced, waiting for roughness, for a clumsy display to spark their laughter. Instead, Malcolm lifted Naomi's face with hands scarred but gentle. His touch was slow, careful, as though afraid to break her. He bent, and their lips met in a kiss so tender the entire church went still. For a breath, all the rumors, all the malice fell silent. When they turned to face the crowd, no one laughed. A cough or two rang out, but most lowered their heads. Naomi's hand tightened in her husband's, and for the first time she walked down the aisle unbowed. Beside her, Malcolm strode like a wall of stone. Outside, the sunlight blazed, dust rising under wagon wheels, and in that moment, under the gaze of a town still groping for words, one truth settled in. What had begun as the year's grandest joke had turned into Dust Creek's quietest lesson. The road from Dust Creek wound steep and stony, each turn drawing them farther from town and deeper into the hush of the pines. Tall trees closed in tight on either side, leaving only a narrow strip of sky above where clouds drifted slow. Wagon wheels ground against the hard earth, groaning under weight. Naomi sat beside Malcolm on the old freighter's bench, her heart tightening with every jolt. For the first time, she was leaving town not to flee, but to begin a life, one the whole world had mocked. Her hair was wrapped neat beneath a scarf. Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt. She glanced at Malcolm. He held the reins in silence, his face carved and still as stone. Yet whenever the wagon lurched, his broad hand instinctively braced the seat's edge, as though to shield her from falling. By the time dusk slipped over the ridges, his cabin stood before them, half hidden by the trees. It was no den of wildness as the town had claimed, but a solid house of timber, roof-pitched, chimney rising tall. Thin smoke curled blue from the hearth inside, mingling with the resin scent of pine. Naomi stepped down, pausing in stillness. The place was plain but strong, carrying a strange sense of safety. A bench rested on the porch, bundles of wood stacked tidy. Beyond, a small stable lay in the shadows, the horse nickering after the long climb. "This is my home," Malcolm said, his voice deep, then softer. "Now it is yours, too." Naomi swallowed hard and nodded. She crossed the threshold, shoes tapping the smooth, scrubbed floorboards. The room within was warmer than she had dared hope. A stone fireplace held a blaze, casting gold light across shelves lined with worn books, handmade tools, and hunting knives arranged with care. The smell of burning pine mixed with the faint aroma of smoked meat, rough but homelike. Her hand brushed the table's surface, feeling the grooves of labor, and she imagined him hewing each board with his scarred hands. A strange flicker of pride rose within her. Together they stoked the fire and set to warming the pot of soup left from the journey. Naomi fumbled with the hearth, letting the flames flare too high. Embers snapped, and a spark kissed her skin. "Ah!" she gasped, drawing back. At once Malcolm caught her hand. His rough fingers enclosed hers, lifting it into the firelight. He bent close, blew gently across the reddened mark. His breath grazed her skin, warm, near enough that Naomi turned her face aside, flustered. The room hushed to nothing but their breathing, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's nothing," he said low, his voice like wind across stone. "Just a small burn." "But you must be careful," she nodded, though she did not pull away. The moment lingered, brief yet endless, until he released her hand and turned aside. They ate in quiet. Soup, hard bread, slices of cured meat. Firelight etched the planes of his face. The square jaw, the silvered scar, the deep brown eyes that seldom lifted. Naomi caught herself watching him, only to flush when she found him watching too. When night pressed close, Malcolm cleared the table, then pointed toward a small side door. "I'll take the storeroom. The bed is yours." Naomi froze. The thought of lying alone in a strange house struck her chest like a hammer. As he passed to fetch blankets, she reached out, catching his wrist. Her hand trembled, but her gaze held steady. "No," she said softly, her voice tight. "The bed is for us both." He stilled, surprise flickering in his eyes. Firelight cast his face, half shadow, half bright, and something new shone there. He gave a single nod, set the blankets down. That night, they lay side by side beneath a heavy quilt. Malcolm turned away, keeping distance, though his slow, steady breath warmed the narrow room. Naomi lay still, hands pressed to her chest, heart racing. For the first time, she was acutely aware of a man's presence so near. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the pines with a restless hush. Inside, the fire sank to embers, faint glow trembling across the ceiling. Naomi rolled gently, her back brushing his. Malcolm flinched at first, then stilled. He did not move away. His wide shoulders radiated warmth, steady and quiet. Naomi closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. His breath rose and fell like a muted lullaby. The wilderness stretched vast beyond the walls, yet here, in this small room, a new life stirred to being. Malcolm lay awake, unable to sleep, hearing every soft breath, every rustle of her shift beneath the quilt. He had lived alone for so many years, yet never had silence made his heart beat so hard. Naomi, too, lay sleepless, but unafraid. She realized, in the dark, with this man beside her, she was beginning, slowly, to remember how to trust. Late winter in the Dust Creek Range always carried cruel surprises. That morning, Malcolm left the cabin beneath a sky of clear blue, planning to hunt venison for the larder. He was used to the sting of mountain wind, used to the frozen trails, but no man could reckon how fast the weather might turn. By midday, dark clouds gathered and spun above the peaks. The first flakes fell heavy, thick, as if to swallow the forest whole. Malcolm wheeled his horse to head back, but the storm pressed faster than the animal's hooves. The trail slicked with ice. The wind slashed sideways, tearing at reins and cloak. Without warning, the ground gave way under a crust of snow. The horse reared, panic blazing. Malcolm struck hard against the earth, his head ringing. The frightened beast bolted downslope, leaving him sprawled in the white fury. Back at the cabin, Naomi marked the failing light with dread. He should have returned by now. She stood at the window, staring into the blur of snow, a tightness gripping her chest. Her hand clenched her dress. When the wind howled louder, she could bear it no longer. She wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, wound a woolen scarf tight, and stepped out to the barn. She remembered Malcolm's warning. If a storm comes, tie a rope from the porch to the stable. Don't lose the path. Her hands trembled, but she fixed the rope fast. Then she let out the gentlest mare, Butter. The cold cut her face like knives, but Naomi pressed on. "Malcolm!" she called. though the wind devoured her voice. Snow clung to her shoulders, her hair blinding her eyes. Still, she followed the memory of his morning trail, watching for the faint hollows of hoof prints beneath fresh snow. Again and again she cried his name, her heart thudding with fear and resolve. At last, through the storm's blur, a dark shape lay half buried by rock. She spurred the mare and slid down, her breath breaking. Malcolm lay curled, half his body already buried under snowdrift. Dear God. Naomi dropped to her knees, brushing snow from his face. His skin was stone cold, lips blue, but his breath still lingered, faint as a candle guttering. Malcolm, stay with me. I'll bring you home. Her voice quavered, but her hands would not falter. With strength born of terror, she dragged and heaved until she had him across the mare's back. His weight pressed heavy, his chill soaking into her bones. She mounted, pulling him close against her, and turned for home, the wind lashing her back in his stead. The short trail seemed endless. Again and again she nearly sank, but each time his pale face against her shoulder steeled her spine. You cannot leave me, she whispered, though the words were as much for herself. At last the cabin loomed. Naomi half fell as she pulled him inside, dragging him to the hearth. His clothes were soaked through, stiff with ice. She stripped each layer, her hands shaking but firm. Down to the thin shirt clinging wet to his skin, she shed her own cloak and scarf, pressed her body to his, willing her warmth into him. She covered them both with thick blankets, then stoked the fire till it roared. Sparks cracked, echoing her frantic pulse. Each time her fingers touched his icy arms, her cheeks burned, but she rubbed his skin, coaxing life back. When the fire alone was not enough, she slid beside him, holding him tight, her body trembling from fear as much as cold. Slowly, heat spread from her frame to his, easing the colorless skin. The cabin filled with the mingled scents of smoke, damp wool, and his body against hers. Naomi did not sleep. Through the long night she checked his breath, pressed hot herb tea to his lips when he stirred half-conscious. When shivers racked him, she pulled him closer, her forehead against his chest, her face flushed from the closeness, yet unwilling to let go. Near dawn, the storm began to break. Snow eased to silence. The wind's rage fell to a low moan through the cracks. The fire sank to embers, but the blankets still held their warmth. Exhaustion blurred Naomi's eyes, yet her arms never slackened. A sigh rose against her ear, then a rough whisper, Naomi. She startled awake. Malcolm's eyes were open, weary but clear, brown depths meeting hers. His lips trembled as he murmured, You saved me. Her throat closed. Tears stung, but she forced a smile. Had I not gone, you'd still be lying beneath the snow. He shifted weakly, his broad hand finding hers. It was feeble but warm, a promise wordless and sure. Naomi bowed her head until her brow touched his. They lay still, their breath mingling, something unspoken passing between them, beyond fear, beyond shame. The storm had raged and passed, leaving not just the scar of survival, but the birth of something more. In that quiet, a nearness was forged, like a small flame kindled against the long winter, destined to burn on. That morning, the sky above the Dust Creek Range hung low and gray, as if warning of ill fortune. Malcolm had ridden down to the valley early, pelts in tow, to trade for salt, flour, and a pouch of herbal tea for Naomi. Left alone in the cabin, Naomi tidied the kitchen and hung blankets by the fire. her heart easing at the thought that winter's worst might finally be behind them. But peace never lingers long on the frontier. The sound of hooves came pounding through the wind. Naomi stepped onto the porch, frowning. 3 riders emerged from the trail, rough figures hunched in saddles. Their coats were torn hides, pistols slung loose at their hips, eyes glinting hungry as wolves. The leader bared his teeth in a grin that carried no kindness. Well, well. So the talk was true. Grizzly Hayes, no, they call him Ghost of the Ridge now, tucked away with a woman. And not just any woman, but the black seamstress this town's laughed at for years. Naomi held her spine straight. Her voice was calm. Malcolm's not home, but you can have some coffee before you leave. The 3 men barked laughter. Hear that? Invited us right in. Mighty generous. They dismounted, tied their horses carelessly, and pushed through the door as though the place was theirs. Naomi shut it behind them, hiding her trembling hands beneath her apron. She remembered Malcolm's warning. If strangers come, don't show fear. Men can smell it like dogs smell blood. She added wood to the stove, set water to boil. Sit down. I'll brew it. A long-haired man with a scar down his cheek jerked his chin. Do that. We've got business with your husband, but while we wait, a hot drink won't hurt. Turning her back, Naomi reached for a small jar tucked high on the shelf. Her mother's blend, an herb that brought dizziness, stomach cramps, but never death. With steady hands, she stirred it into 3 cups, forcing her fingers not to shake. When she faced them again, her smile was faint but steady. She set the mugs down. Here you are. They laughed, raising the cups as if toasting. Coffee mingled with the stink of sweat and powder. Naomi sat, folding cloth in her lap, pretending to sew. It did not take long. After a few swallows, the biggest of them slammed his hand on the table, groaning. Damn you! What did you put in this? Naomi rose slowly, crossing to the rifle that leaned near the door. Her hands quivered, but her voice rang clear. Just herbs. Won't kill you, but you'll remember the walk down this mountain. The 3 staggered to their feet, drawing weapons too late. Naomi leveled the rifle, the barrel unwavering. Drop them! Now something in her tone froze them where they stood. One crumpled to the floor, clutching his belly. The other 2 exchanged a glance, then tossed their pistols aside. Naomi kicked them back, ordered sharp, Out! Leave the horses. You'll walk, you damned wench, one spat. But his knees buckled. She took a step forward, eyes hard. I won't say it twice. They stumbled to the door, cursing under their breath, but powerless. Naomi followed them out, forcing them past the porch. She stripped their guns, lashed them to the stable rail, then stood watch as the men staggered off down the trail until the storm of snow and trees swallowed them. Only then did her breath release, her palms slick with sweat, though the rifle never slipped. By late afternoon, Malcolm returned. At once he noticed the strange horses tied in his yard. His chest tightened. He rushed inside. Naomi stood by the table, calmly clearing the mugs. Her face was composed, as though nothing had happened. Naomi, Malcolm rasped. Did someone come? She lifted her eyes, steady. 3 men. Said they had business with you. He stepped close, his hand on her shoulder. Did they hurt you? Naomi shook her head. They only had coffee. Then they left on foot. Malcolm frowned. Coffee? Her lips curved faintly as she gestured toward the jar on the shelf. My mother's recipe, enough to lay them low without harm. Once they weakened, I took your rifle, disarmed them, and sent them away. Malcolm stared, torn between awe and dread. Then he pulled her into his arms, voice rough with fear. Naomi, you were reckless. If anything had happened, if I'd lost you, I couldn't bear it. She hesitated, then pressed her hand to his back, feeling the tremor in his frame. I couldn't sit idle and wait for ruin. You taught me strength. I only did what was needed. Malcolm held her tighter, his face buried in her hair. You don't understand. To lose you, I wouldn't survive it. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the weight of his embrace sink into her. In her chest rose a warmth edged with sorrow, the knowledge that she was no longer pitied, but necessary, bound into the very core of him. Outside, the mountains burned red with sunset. Inside, the cabin's fire blazed brighter still. That night, the wind swept through the pines on the mountain slope, leaving a deep stillness inside the cabin walls. The fire in the hearth glowed bright, casting its golden warmth across the rough timber. Malcolm sat in a wooden chair before the blaze, his broad hand cupped around a mug of coffee he did not drink. Naomi sat across from him, a blanket draped lightly across her shoulders, stitching a frayed seam with steady fingers. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the snap of burning logs and the sound of their breathing filled the small room. At last, Malcolm set his mug down, eyes fixed on the flames. His voice, rough and low, broke the silence. Naomi, I fear I've forgotten how to love. The words struck through the cabin like a hammer. Naomi's hand faltered, her needle slipping from the cloth. She lifted her gaze and found his eyes, earnest, uncertain, carrying the weight of years spent swallowed by darkness. Her reply came soft, thick with ache. And I have never truly been loved. That plain truth needed no adornment. It bridged the distance between them better than any vow could. Malcolm rose, moving slowly toward her. His shadow stretched long across the wall, tall but never threatening. He stopped before her, the mingled scents of wood smoke and worn leather between them. His hand reached out, not demanding but asking. Naomi hesitated, then placed her small, work-worn hand into his. His fingers trembled, hers were cold. When they laced together, both felt their hearts pound. He bent low, cautious as if she might retreat. Naomi tilted her face upward, her breath quick, eyes half closed. Their lips met, hesitant, trembling, like two wanderers stumbling into each other in the dark, unsure if it was dream or truth. Naomi shivered. He began to draw back, but her hand pressed lightly against his chest, holding him there. The kiss deepened, unhurried, reverent, a language both had long forgotten, learned anew with each touch. When they parted, both breathed hard, their cheeks burning. Malcolm leaned his forehead to hers, whispering, I had forgotten for so long. Naomi's smile trembled but steady. Then we will learn again, together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as though a storm might steal her away. She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the solid beat of his heart beneath the coarse fabric. His hand moved along her back, shaking slightly, yet tender. The fire crackled, light spilling over every detail. The loose strands of Naomi's hair tangled against his shirt. Her eyes closed in quiet peace, her hand resting over his heart. They sat like that for a long time, letting silence speak. Then Malcolm lifted her chin, searching her tear-bright eyes. He kissed her again, slower, deeper, hunger long denied pressing beneath gentleness. Naomi answered, no longer timid, her lips trembling, but seeking his. His coat slid to the floor, then the blanket slipped from her shoulders. They did not rush. Each motion was careful, as though every touch might be the first and last. Naomi felt his hands explore, never crossing until she gave her nod. With each small ascent, another barrier fell. The steps of closeness climbed one by one through respect as much as longing. Their breath grew heavier, hotter, the scents of smoke, pine, and their mingled bodies filling the cabin like a strange hymn. Outside, the wind wailed through the forest, but inside only the rhythm of heartbeats, the rasp of breath, and the groan of wood beneath them told the story. When at last they gave themselves wholly, it was not frenzy, but release, the breaking open of two long-starved souls. Each shiver, each gasp, spoke of a hunger unnamed until that night. Afterward they lay side by side, chests heaving, sweat dampening their brows, eyes shining brighter than the firelight. Malcolm brushed back the wet strands of hair clinging to Naomi's face, whispering, "You've given me more than I ever dared to dream." Naomi rested against him, listening to the steady beat beneath his ribs. Her eyes closed as she breathed her answer. "You are the first to ever see me as I am." In the quiet moments before sleep claimed them, Malcolm pressed a soft kiss into her hair. Naomi smiled faintly in his arms, letting the world outside fade to shadow. Beyond the walls, the wind still howled and the snow still fell. But inside that cabin, for the first time in years, neither of them felt cold. Winter on the mountain did more than test endurance. It carved, refined, and revealed strength hidden even from the one who bore it. Naomi Carter, once the woman who shrank behind the windows of her Dust Creek dress shop, now stood on the wide sweep of snow outside the cabin, both hands steady on the rifle Malcolm had placed in her grasp. The wind hissed through the pines, but she did not tremble. Her gaze fixed on the wooden target 30 yards away. She drew a long breath, closed her eyes, opened them, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the valley, the bullet biting into the target's edge. Naomi pressed her lips tight. Terrible. Behind her, Malcolm's faint smile stirred. He stepped closer, boots crunching on crusted snow. Not terrible. For a beginner, that's fine. But to strike a deer's heart, or drop a man who comes too near, you'll need to adjust. He moved behind her, his broad hands settling lightly on her arms. Relax your shoulders. Don't tense. Let your breath guide you, like stitching a seam. Naomi nodded, though heat flushed her skin. He loomed close, his chest near her back, his breath warm with pine smoke brushing her ear. His hand traced from shoulder to wrist, aligning her hold. "Now try again," he murmured. She inhaled, pressed the trigger in rhythm with her breath. The shot rang, and the bullet struck near the center. She turned, delighted, only to find Malcolm's face inches from hers. One heartbeat closer, and their lips would meet. Naomi spun away, cheeks burning. Malcolm only chuckled, his hand falling back, leaving her skin oddly bare without its weight. In the days that followed, Naomi grew fluent with the rifle. She learned to load cartridges, to clean the barrel, to hold steady even with numbed fingers. She hunted rabbits and birds, bringing new flavor to their table. "I never thought I could," she confessed one afternoon. lifting the rabbit she'd felled. Malcolm's reply was simple. I knew you could, from the start. On another day, while Malcolm hunted, Naomi heard a faint cry near the tree line. She found a wolf pup, its gray fur matted, body trembling in the snow. Golden eyes stared wide, fearful, pleading. Naomi hesitated, then wrapped it in her cloak and carried it home. Malcolm's brow furrowed when he saw. Naomi, that's no dog. When it grows, it'll turn on you. She sat by the fire, stroking the tangled fur. It's only a child, abandoned. I can't leave it. His silence stretched. Then he sighed. So be it. But if it turns, you'll let me end it. Naomi nodded. The pup stayed, fed thin gruel and sleeping by the hearth. In time it grew strong, wagged its tail when she neared, even tolerated Malcolm's touch. Yet its eyes followed only her, as though the wild in it recognized the outcast soul that had taken it in. Beyond rifle practice and the wolf pup, Naomi found ways to brighten their meals. Winter rations of salt meat and dry. Grain might have dulled any appetite, but she ground dried berries into flour, mixed them with honey for cakes. She simmered bones with forest roots for broth rich with flavor. Malcolm often watched her in the kitchen, hands once bent over stitches now fumbling at pots, eyes alight with quiet pride when the dish succeeded. One night, tasting her root stew, he smiled. You could turn a stone into supper. Naomi blushed. I only don't want you to tire of me. Malcolm set his spoon down, gaze deep and steady. Naomi, I'll never tire, so long as it's you. She dropped her eyes, though her heart thundered. Hunters and trappers sometimes sought their door, needing aid. Soon, word spread that Naomi was more than Malcolm's wife. She was a healer. Her mother's old books, sharpened by her memory and courage, gave her the skill to tend fever, stitch wounds, set bones. Once, when a hunter's leg was torn by a trap, Malcolm readied to haul him down to town. But Naomi cleaned the gash, stitched it with a firm hand, pressed herbs to stop the bleeding. The man lived, and word followed. The black seamstress, the one they mocked, she saves lives. Malcolm often watched her bent over the injured, curls tumbling across her cheek, eyes bright with focus. He felt pride stir, mingled with awe. This woman the town had scorned now shone brighter in the wilderness than any he had known. One morning he led her back to the shooting ground. The wind bit sharp, but Naomi no longer trembled as she raised the rifle. Malcolm stood close behind, his hands light on her shoulders, his chest brushing her back, his breath warm on her neck. Naomi stiffened, face aflame, but his words were calm. Steady. Hear your heartbeat, not the wind. She nodded. His finger rested over hers on the trigger. Together, they pressed. The bullet split the air, striking the target's center. Naomi laughed aloud, but froze as she turned to find his eyes. Too close, too intent. For a moment, the world vanished but for their shared breath. She turned away, hiding her trembling. Yet deep inside, a new flame had caught. That winter changed her. Naomi was no longer the seamstress hunched beneath a lamp, shrinking from scorn. She was a markswoman, a healer, the keeper of a wolf pup and of the fire that never went out. Above all, she was Malcolm's companion, standing tall at his side, unbent before the world's gaze. Dust Creek might still laugh, but on the mountain, Naomi Carter was rewriting her life. A year had passed since Naomi Carter left town in her deep blue dress, her hand in Malcolm Hayes's, stepping into a life the whole world swore would break her. The gossip lingered long after. That ugly black seamstress won't last a winter up there, and Ghost of the Ridge will toss her aside before spring. But winter came and went. Spring followed, summer burned, and by the time autumn rolled back, Dust Creek witnessed a return no one had foreseen. That day, the town bustled with Founder's Day. Flags lined the streets, stalls rose along the dusty road, laughter spilled like smoke into the air. Men donned their best coats, young girls twirled new dresses, ranchers bargained over crops. Then word raced through the crowd like fire on dry brush. Naomi and Malcolm are coming to the festival. Whispers flew. She wouldn't dare show her face. Another scoffed. She'll look half-starved, wild as the hills. But when the wagon rattled into town, silence fell. Malcolm still towered, dressed in a sharp black suit, his eyes stern enough to part the crowd. But it was Naomi who drew every gaze. She was no longer the timid seamstress behind round spectacles, shoulders hunched. She sat straight, wearing a dark green dress that shaped her frame, her shoulders proud, her face bronzed by sun and wind. Her curls were bound back, a few strands catching the light like threads of gold. Most of all, her eyes met the town squarely, unflinching. Those who once muttered, "Plain spinster Carter," found themselves unable to meet her gaze. "My lord, is that Naomi?" one woman stammered. "No, that's Mrs. Hayes." "Different altogether," came a quieter reply. Malcolm climbed down and offered his hand. Naomi stepped onto the dirt, lifting her chin, shame left far behind. In that moment, Dust Creek was forced to reckon with its cruelty. The festival unfolded with its usual contests: pie-eating, wrestling, and the rifle shoot, the day's fiercest draw. Men jostled to sign in, voices loud, wagers louder. When Naomi stepped to the table, the crowd erupted. "Women don't compete," Judge Wallace barked. Naomi's voice was steady. "Is there a law that says so?" He shuffled through his ledger, grumbling. "No, but then I'll compete." Her words cut clean. For a heartbeat, the square fell still. Laughter followed, jeers tossed like stones. "She'll be sewing dresses at the Target." But Naomi only lifted the rifle and took her place. From a distance, Malcolm folded his arms, his eyes calm with quiet faith. Her first shot struck near the center. A murmur rippled. The second hit closer still. By the third, the bullet split beside the bullseye. The crowd gasped. Jeers turned to uneasy respect. The famed local sharpshooter bested her by a single point. But it hardly mattered. Dust Creek had seen enough. "She's not the same woman," they whispered. Afterward, Naomi and Malcolm strolled through the booths. She bowed her head politely, smiled, answered greetings, whether cold or curious. Some turned away, ashamed. Others muttered a stiff, "Good evening, Mrs. Hayes," and then came Samuel Wright, her old suitor, now husband to a banker's daughter. He still bore the polish of money, but his eyes wavered when they met hers. "Naomi," his voice sought warmth, but faltered. You look well." Naomi held his gaze steady as steel. "Thank you. I'm living well." Beside him, his wife lingered, eyes narrowed with suspicion and envy. Samuel flushed, lips tight, and stepped back. He could not endure the confidence in Naomi's eyes, the same eyes that once begged him, now proud and untouchable. Malcolm's hand rested lightly at her back, silent, protective. Naomi lifted her head and walked on. The crowd parted without a sound. That evening, music filled the town hall, fiddles striking up a lively reel. Malcolm turned, bowing slightly. "Mrs. Hayes, would you honor me with a dance?" Naomi smiled, placing her hand in his. They moved onto the floor. The first steps were stiff, then softened into rhythm. He turned her, the green dress fanning wide, lamplight catching in her eyes. They laughed together, light, unforced, a happiness that needed no proof. The townsfolk watched, voices quieting. No trace of mockery remained. Before them stood not a jest, but a true pair, strong, whole, radiant in their own right. As the music ended, applause broke, hesitant at first, then rolling strong. Naomi froze for a breath. Then Malcolm squeezed her hand. She let herself smile. Later, stepping from the hall beneath a sky spattered with stars, Naomi lifted her face to the heavens. A year ago they laughed. Tonight, they were silent. Malcolm's hand pressed hers, firm. "And in the years ahead, they'll remember you as you are." Her eyes glistened. She knew, at last, Dust Creek would never look at her the old way again. Time moved like wind across the ridge. Dust Creek, once a lonely dot of wood and dust, grew into a stop for freight wagons and settlers. The dirt street was paved with stone. The clapboard fronts gave way to brick. Yet one story never aged. The tale of Malcolm Hayes, ghost of the ridge, and Naomi Carter, the ugly black seamstress the town once mocked. Their names still surfaced in saloons, around firesides, in idle evenings. Young men's eyes lit when they heard how the woman felled 3 outlaws with nothing but a pot of coffee and a rifle. Children sang in sing-song voices. Naomi and Ghost shot the bullseye, lived on the mountain, feared no storm. The details stretched, twisted, and grew taller with time, but the heart stayed true. A man who saw the real beauty in a woman the town had scorned. Malcolm and Naomi lived out their years in the cabin he had raised with his own hands. Each season left its mark. In spring, herbs grew in neat rows by the door. In summer, Naomi taught children to stitch and tend wounds. In autumn, they hunted deer together, hauling meat down to trade for salt and flour. In winter, they drew close by the fire, reading aloud to each other, or sitting silent while the wind howled. Naomi became known as a healer. Woodsmen with broken bones, mothers in hard labor, children burning with fever, all found their way to the cabin. Malcolm disliked crowds, but he never turned them away. He'd light the fire, boil the water, stand steady behind her, pride written plain on his weathered face. And Naomi, with the years, only grew surer. The laughter of the town lost its sting. When she walked the streets now, no one dared call her Spinster Carter. She was Mrs. Hayes, spoken with respect. The woman who once bowed her head now walked straight, chin high. Years passed. Silver threaded Naomi's curls, lines deepened across Malcolm's brow. Their story ripened into legend. Some swore Naomi had once been a beauty, hiding it only to test the world. Others claimed Malcolm was bewitched, but those who had seen them together knew better. There was no spell save love and the gift of truly being seen. One Founder's Day, Naomi came to town square with a small girl in hand, her niece, all curls and laughter. Malcolm stood behind them, tall frame now bent, but his eyes still proud. Whispers rippled through the crowd. They look happy, and no one dared laugh. One winter, when the wind cut deep and snow buried the trail, Malcolm's strength waned. Hands that once split logs trembled to lift kindling. Naomi guided him to the porch, sat beside him with a heavy blanket across their knees, their old hands twined together. The sun slipped behind the mountains, laying its last gold over the pines. Far off, wolves cried, stirring the memory of the pup Naomi once cradled by the hearth. Malcolm turned his head, voice rough with age but steady. Naomi, you were never ugly. You only waited for a man with eyes clear enough to see you. Naomi squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. She smiled, saying nothing. The answer was already in their joined hands, in the long years lived out together, quiet, proud, untouched by scorn. When at last they passed, just months apart, the notice in Dust Creek was short. Malcolm and Naomi Hayes laid to rest on the mountain where they made their life. Yet their story lingered. Folks told it to their children, some through tears, some with a smile. And when someone in Dust Creek was mocked or cast aside, there was always a voice to remind, "Remember Naomi Hayes?" The town once called her ugly. She became a legend. The cabin still stands in the pines, its porch scarred with years. Some say if you sit there at dusk, you might hear faint laughter, echoes of two souls who once dared to love in spite of every sneer, and lived their lives on their own terms. The story of Malcolm and Naomi did not end with jeers, but with the quiet reverence of a mountain that bore witness. Two who were despised, pushed aside, proved that love and respect could turn the smallest life into a legacy. They never asked for praise, but the town was left with no choice but to remember with its heart. And now, when we recall, the truth shines plain. What matters is not beauty nor wealth, but being truly seen, cherished, and walked beside to the very end. If you have known loneliness, if you've carried the sting of mockery, remember this. Somewhere, someone will see your true worth. Malcolm saw Naomi, and together they built a home no storm could touch. Thank you for walking this journey. What do you think of a love that came late, yet endured whole? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe, so we may keep bringing you more tales of love, strength, and faith from the Wild West.